Hello, my name is Angela Reisner and I'm presenting on X-linked adrenoleukodystrophy. It's generally agreed that the first case of X-linked adrenoleukodystrophy was documented in 1910. A 6-year-old boy showed several signs of the disease, including hyperpigmentation, decreased mental ability, and eventually he lost the ability to walk and talk. It was later discovered that his brother died from a similar disease at the age of 8, hinting this disease was genetic. More started to be understood about the disease by the 1970s, which enabled a diagnostic test to be developed in the 1980s, and in 1993 the gene that causes X-linked adrenoleukodystrophy was identified. So all in all, it's a fairly recently discovered disease. Somewhere between 1 in 20,000 and 1 in 50,000 have the disease. It's rare, but it is the most common peroxisomal disease. The peroxisome, which is pictured here in green, breaks down fatty acids and amino acids, which make up proteins, through a process called oxidation. The process of oxidation makes hydrogen peroxide as a product, which is where peroxisomes get their name. The number of affected people is fairly constant across countries and ethnic groups, but more men than women are affected because it is an X-linked disorder. We will get more into that when we talk about inheritance patterns, but essentially it's because males have only one X chromosome, so they express all the genes on it, whereas females have an extra X chromosome. So what is adrenoleukodystrophy? It occurs when there's a mutation or change in the gene that codes for the adrenoleukodystrophy protein. Genes are sections of DNA that code for proteins. Normally, the adrenoleukodystrophy protein transports very long-chain fatty acids into peroxisomes. The peroxisome, as we saw earlier, has a double membrane, so long-chain fatty acids need the adrenoleukodystrophy protein to help them get into the peroxisome. When there's a mutation in the gene that codes for this protein so that the protein does not function, very long-chain fatty acids cannot get into the peroxisome to be destroyed, and they accumulate. This causes severe effects in the body, such as damaging myelin, which is the protective covering around the nerves, and the adrenal cortex, which makes many important hormones. There's actually 3 types of X-linked adrenoleukodystrophy. The first is childhood cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy, which is the most common, makes up 33 to 57% of the cases. Addison's disease is the most rare and makes up 10% of the cases. Adrenomyeloneuropathy makes up 25 to 46% of the cases, and sometimes teenagers or young adults get an extreme version that affects the nervous system and the adrenal cortex. Researchers are still trying to determine if this is just another variant of the 3 types known, or possibly a 4th type of the disease. The first type is childhood cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy, called CALD for short. The symptoms begin in early childhood, about 4 to 10 years old, and they get progressively worse. Symptoms include learning, academic and behavior difficulties, vision issues, problems swallowing, bad coordination, and even though it's the cerebral type, in some, decreased adrenal gland function. Life expectancy varies with the rate at which the disease progresses, but most die a few years after the symptoms first appear. Some may live a little longer with significant medical intervention. You can see in the picture how MRI imaging can track the progression of the disease. In Addison's disease, patients only have symptoms related to adrenal cortex insufficiency. The adrenal glands are located on top of the kidneys, as you can see to the picture on the right, and the outer layer, what you see as yellow in the picture and zoomed in to be purple, is called the adrenal cortex. This area makes many important hormones. Without enough of these important hormones, a person can experience fatigue, irritability, muscle and joint pain, abdominal pain, nausea, diarrhea, weight loss, low blood pressure, low blood sugar, and lowered libido in females. One of the most recognizable signs is hyperpigmentation, when the skin gets a darker bronze color. President Kennedy had Addison's. Another distinct sign is silver deposits around the teeth, like you see in the bottom picture. Addison's disease can develop in a child or adult, but most significant symptoms have developed by mid-adulthood. Of the 3 types of X-linked adrenoleukodystrophy, Addison's disease usually has the longest life expectancy. However, there is a severe acute form called Addisonian crisis, which can be life-threatening. Adrenomyeloneuropathy has an onset between early and middle adulthood. This type has cerebral and adrenal effects, showing symptoms such as genital tract and urinary problems, behavioral changes, and mental changes. This type primarily affects the spinal cord by destroying that protective covering, myelin, we talked about earlier, and that results in paraparesis, which is a progressive weakness and stiffness of the legs. The life expectancy depends on the severity of the disease, but it can be significantly shortened. So, what causes X-linked adrenoleukodystrophy? As we mentioned, it's caused by a mutation or change in a gene encoding for adrenoleukodystrophy protein. It's not a big protein, only made of 233 amino acids, but it has big functions like we discussed earlier about transporting the very long-chain fatty acids into the peroxisome to get destroyed. Okay, but what's the specific gene, you may wonder? The gene symbol, which is its shortened name like a nickname, is the ABCD1 gene. Now, there isn't one type of mutation or change in the gene that causes it to make a non-functioning protein. In fact, there are 2,901 possible mutations, and more being identified. These mutations can change the gene in many different ways. Some take part of the gene code away and replace it with a different code, some shift the code, and some even put in new code or take away code. The mode of inheritance for this disease is X-linked recessive. X-linked means it is on the X chromosome. Since males only have one X chromosome, this means that if they have the faulty gene, they will always have the disease. Recessive means that if there is a dominant gene, the recessive will not be expressed. So in females who have two X chromosomes, there needs to be 2 copies of the faulty gene for the person to have the disease. If a female only has 1 copy of the affected gene, she is said to be a carrier. The idea of carriers is unique in recessive diseases, as it allows the disease to skip a generation. Let's look at this sample pedigree to get a better idea. Red means the person is affected with the disease. A little a next to the X means the X chromosome has the faulty gene. Looking at the top, Jacob is affected and his wife Olivia is a carrier. Their daughter Leah inherited a faulty X from her mom and a faulty X from her dad, so she is affected. Since she has 2 of the same, we call her homozygous. Jacob and Leah also had an affected son, Bradley. Bradley got the Y chromosome from his father, but he got unlucky of sorts and got the faulty X from his mother. Bradley and Meredith then went on to have a daughter, Hannah, who is a carrier. Hannah's son, Liam, then gets her faulty X and is affected. We can see how X-linked recessive traits can skip generations, as it did from Bradley to his grandson, Liam. If a mother is not a carrier, like Sarah near the bottom left, even if they have children with an affected man, none of the sons will be affected since they only inherit the Y from their father. Overall, you'll notice that the trait is relatively rare in the pedigree, and it occurs mainly in males. So what are the options for genetic testing? Some countries offer pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. During pregnancy, the ABCD1 gene can be analyzed from a chronic villus sample taken at 11 to 13 weeks, or from amniotic cells at 15 to 18 weeks to evaluate the fetus. Since, due to the progressive nature of the disease, it's important to catch the disease early, X-linked adrenoleukodystrophy is part of the mandatory newborn screening in several states, as seen by this map. It's recommended nationwide, but as you can see by this map, the green is where it's currently mandatory, and the other colors are where it is going to be implemented soon. Newborn screening is the most common form of testing for the disease. For children and adults, testing should be done if they have relatives that are affected or carriers, or if they show symptoms. The cost is around $640. There are actually different ways one can be tested for X-linked adrenoleukodystrophy. A mutation analysis of the ABCD1 gene can be conducted, as with fetuses, and interestingly with women, because 15% of affected women have normal levels of the very long-chain fatty acids in their plasma. But in others, the levels of very long-chain fatty acids can be checked directly. Newborn screening usually utilizes both of these methods, first checking the levels of very long-chain fatty acids, and then confirming the diagnosis with a mutation analysis of the ABCD1 gene. This is a list of picture references, and this is a list of references for other information that was used in this presentation. Thanks for your time.